Call to order for tonight's meeting. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Start at 6, Al. You can make it for the roll call. Madam Clerk, if you'd take roll.
Councilmember Bill De La Pena.
Present.
Councilmember Adam.
Here.
Councilmember Engler.
Here.
Councilmember Jones.
Here.
Mayor McCoy.
Present. Item number 4, request for continuance of any public hearing or agenda item. I don't think there are any. No? Oh, we do have one. Go ahead.
Yes, item 7F on the consent calendar. We'll be pulling that one. Yeah, it'll be at a subsequent meeting.
Okay. Public hearing, agenda. Okay. And there's no special presentations or announcements, and we have public comments.
This is a time and place for public comments. A speaker card is available for those wishing to address the City Council regarding items on the agenda or on a subject within the city's jurisdiction. All remarks should be addressed to the council as a whole, and all documents for City Council and the official record should be presented to the City Clerk prior to speaking. Speakers are requested to state their name and community of residence for the record. Under state law, public comment matters may not be considered by the council unless listed on the agenda, but may be referred to the city manager for administrative follow-up. 4 individuals have presented cards, and pursuant to council standards, speakers are allowed 3 minutes. The yellow light displays when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Before we do public comments, I just wanted to recognize Boy Scout Troop 761. We have Michael and Ryan in the house. Fellas, stand up. Let everybody clap for you. These future leaders of the Conejo Valley are doing their Communications Merit Badge. So pay attention as these folks come and speak and learn from them, okay? Our first public speaker will be Stephanie Wilson. Good evening.
Hardworking staff and our amazing fire and police. Thank you. Thank you for the incredible support that you provide for the arts. Here at the Civic Arts Plaza, let me just stop. I'm Stephanie Wilson tonight, speaking as the Director of Development for the New West Symphony. I wear a lot of hats, so. Not only here at the Civic Arts Plaza, through the robust TO Arts, and throughout the city to all the arts organizations, through the Passionate Cultural Affairs Commission and the Community Events Endowment Fund. The arts are thriving in Thousand Oaks, and it's due to your belief in our work and the seeds that were planted 25 years ago. As you know, the New West Symphony is a proud resident company of the Civic Arts Plaza, and tonight I'm here to tell you about 2 exciting upcoming concerts. This Saturday, the Symphony will present a new work that we have commissioned from House of Cards composer Jeff Beal, who has received 4 Primetime Emmy Award nominations and 1 statue. Wow. This will be the world premiere. The work, entitled The Great Circle, is influenced by the power of nature to both destroy and regenerate itself. Because the work was originally inspired by the Thomas Fire, the Symphony is offering fire and mudslide victims and first responders complimentary tickets by going to our website. Also on the program is Mozart's Violin Concerto No. 5, nicknamed the Turkish Concerto for its playful sense of humor, featuring the extraordinary world-renowned violinist Karen Guillermo. Karen was born in Tokyo, grew up in New York and Montreal, and now lives in Berlin. She's a musician of the highest caliber and tours throughout the world, playing on the Aurora Ex Faulis, which is a Stradivarius violin from 1703. The third piece is Beethoven's Symphony No. 7. Beethoven. On February 9th, in just a few weeks, the Symphony returns with the concert that was originally planned in November and rescheduled for this February. You want to know about two special pieces by local composer Pauline Frechette, The Sacred Mountains of Ojai and Reflections. Sacred Mountains of Ojai is another world premiere and will be accompanied by paintings from local Ojai artists projected on the screen. Also on the program is Beethoven's Concerto No. 1 in C major for piano and orchestra, featuring 27-year-old Italian-born pianist Rodolfo Leone. He's the first prize winner of the 15th International Beethoven Piano Competition in Vienna in 2017. Two world-renowned musicians, two brilliant guest conductors, 2 times Beethoven, 2 world premieres, 1 local professional orchestra. So please join us at the New West Symphony this weekend at the Civic Arts Plaza, and thank you for all you do.
Stephanie, amazing. In 3 minutes, you got all that in. That was awesome. Thank you so much for all you do.
Theater training. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Robin Caswick. Oh, that's all right. Good evening.
Hi, Mr.
Hello.
Mayor, council people who help. Thank you. Thank you for your service. Like I said, my name's Robin Caswick, and I live 2 houses down from the Thousand Oaks High School. And my family's lived here since 1963 in that house. And when I heard, I don't know, I think it was 6 weeks ago, about this developer wanting to put in the 7-Eleven and 24-hour gas station on the corner of Moore Park and Flores, I was upset, and I went online to our Nextdoor neighborhood app, and hundreds of people are upset. They've signed a petition, and the developer had his first meeting, which was well attended, and pretty much 98% of people were very upset. But in spite of being upset, we really did offer some positive suggestions for that land use, because nobody wants to see a blank space where it could be used. Right adjacent, there's a very nice medical building that causes no problems, no loitering, no homelessness, no increased traffic, and the property owner still has an income coming from this business. And the people in the meeting made numerous suggestions to the developer, and he shut all of them down because he wants the thing that generates the most revenue, which is a 24-hour gas station, being the 3rd gas station within a mile. We don't need another gas station and another 7-Eleven. And a number of people have said that the 7-Eleven further north on Moore Park, no, further south on Moore Park, has a lot of police presence. And they have a police presence there for a reason. There's things that happen. And you know, I have a great relationship with the high school and the students and the football games and the noise and the band, and all of it makes my home and my community really nice. And a 7-Eleven with homelessness and our kids having access to tobacco and alcohol, because all this, you know, we do have a few bad people in our area. And it just is not a good use for that area. So I just, you know, I know that you all talk and kind of make the best decision for our community. Thousand Oaks is great. You've done a great job. And I just want to voice my opinion to not have a gas station and a 7-Eleven. Thanks.
Robin, thank you. We're grateful for you taking the time to share with us. Our next speaker will be Kyle Rohrbach. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, city staff, Thousand Oaks. I've been here a couple of times in the past. I am a longtime resident of the city. I'm a product of CVUSD. I'm a volunteer with our Miller YMCA Youth in Government, former youth commissioner, current planning commission applicant, if you're still looking for nominees. But I'm actually not here to address you as any one of those. I'm actually going to address you tonight as a Rams fan. Woohoo. And so if anybody in here doesn't know, the Rams have made their way to the Super Bowl and have become the NFC champs. I would love very much to see the city sponsor, support, organize, champion an event or something that we could invite the Rams organization, the fans, the front office, to our community and to our city, whether it's a parade. It's an event. It's a party. It's something out in a field. I don't know what it is, but I think that even though they haven't won the Super Bowl yet, what they've accomplished so far is not only worth mentioning because of the organization, but it's worth mentioning because of what they mean to this community,
Exactly.
which I know all of you know. So I think there's a few reasons why this would, play really. I think it's a good idea. And not only should we celebrate people who have been so good to this community, but I think it's also a really good opportunity to bring the community together. What's been really cool about their involvement and their engagement here is people who wouldn't normally identify themselves as NFL fans or football fans are, because of what they mean to our story and how much they stepped up when it mattered most. And I think that for us to stand up and say, we not only appreciate you, not only are we grateful for you, but, congratulations, we want to now celebrate with you, I think would bring a lot of people out and bring everybody together. And there's no bad time for that. So I think it's something to consider, and I'm happy to help in whatever way is possible. Thanks.
Thanks, Kyle. You'll be encouraged by city manager's words at the end. We're on it. We're just as excited as you are. Go Rams. Next speaker, Rudy Gonzalez.
Good evening, Mayor McCoy, council members, Mr. Powers. I'm Rudy Gonzalez, a proud resident of Thousand Oaks. Most of you know me as Southern California Edison's Government Relations Manager for the area. I'm here tonight as both a board member and current cohort member of the Ventura County Leadership Academy, otherwise known as VCLA. The mission of VCLA is to connect people and issues that will strengthen our county. VCLA connects and cultivates a diverse network of passionate, capable leaders through an immersion in both critical issues shaping Ventura County and opportunities for personal and professional growth. VCLA's comprehensive program ignites awareness and inspiration, helping cohort members discover their individual pathway towards impacting our region. The specific objectives of VCLA are to create a leadership development program incorporating business, social services, education, community, government, and cultural issues throughout Ventura County. It's also to promote the inclusion of diverse groups of individuals. Also to broaden the awareness, understanding, and appreciation of a variety of critical issues affecting life in Ventura County through contacts with community leaders and participation in workshops, field studies, and related programs. The curriculum includes focus sessions on public safety, education, economic development, water, transportation, healthcare, nonprofits and volunteerism, the environment, agriculture and land use, regional issues, and governance. The sessions are interactive with open dialogue between presenters and the program participants. Participants also conduct site visits and field trips as part of their background research on the various topics of discussion. It's a 9-month program that includes one full-day session each month from September through May, and also includes a 2.5-day trip to Sacramento to study current legislative issues. I'd like to personally thank Mayor McCoy and Community Development Director Mark Town for their participation in our most recent cohort session that focused on local government. For anyone watching on TV or here this evening, if you're interested in participating in next year's cohort, VCLA is hosting a recruitment mixer that will take place on Tuesday, February 12th from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. at the Ventura County Credit Union office located at 18 West Thousand Oaks Boulevard in Thousand Oaks. You can also visit vcleadership.org for additional information on the program and information on the West County Recruitment Mixer taking place in March. Thank you for your time.
Rudy, thank you. It was a great organization. And again, I guess that website was vcleadership.org.
That's correct, yes.
Folks, get involved. That's a great group.
Thank
you for your time. Mr. Powers, would you share with Kyle about the Rams?
Yeah,
Bring 'em up
just
to
following
speed.
up on a handful of items,
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. First of all, we're looking forward to the New West Symphony performance. It's going to be a good one. In regards to the speaker about 7-Eleven, that item is, I think, tentatively scheduled for Planning Commission at the beginning of April. And that's the next step in the process there. Rudy's comments regarding Vcla, it's a great organization. Really encourage you to check it out if you have interest in making some great connections and learning more about what's happening across Ventura County. And then finally on the Rams, we are obviously extremely proud of our hometown Rams here. For those that might not know or might not be from the area, the Rams have their in-season training facilities here in Thousand Oaks. Actually proudly wearing a Rams lapel pin tonight in honor of it, thanks to Mayor Pro Tem Adam, who's a season ticket holder and a great Rams supporter. We've already been in touch with the team, both immediately following the game and throughout the day today. We have some exciting things in the works, not just one or two things. We have a handful of really exciting things we're planning to recognize the team, both in the short term here as they head off to the Super Bowl, and then after they get back. So stay tuned. We're working through some logistics, and we'll be sharing it widely as soon as we have things. That's it.
I think that if they win, I should be able to shave your head. That's not going to happen. All right. Item number 7, consent calendar. Motion to approve? I'll call on Councilmember Bill de la Peña.
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Madam Clerk, will you put together the vote, please?
Mayor, if we could just confirm by the from the maker of the motion that excludes item 7F.
7F.
Excludes 7F, as in Frank, yes.
Yes, 7F, as in Frank. Need a voice vote?
Yes, let's do a voice vote. Councilmember Engler?
Yes.
Councilmember Bill de la Peña?
Yes?
Councilmember Adam?
Yes.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
That motion carries 5-0. Oh, I'm sorry. Mayor.
Go Rams, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, may I make a brief comment?
I don't know why it's not working.
Okay.
I realize that
yes.
we just voted on this. Let me just say that coming from a smaller agency, I'm not used to, approving this. I'm getting sticker shock. 516,000, 629,000, et cetera, et cetera. I think what we're doing here is we're expressing confidence in the people that made these decisions, which I think is fine. They're obviously on our agenda because I presume law requires that we approve them. Isn't that right?
Right. And we research them beforehand.
And I'm not questioning that, but these are very large, and I think what we're really doing is saying that we stand behind and agree with the people that have worked on this, because we're not, seeing other bids, we're just being asked to approve what has been done. And I'm just wondering if that is really the point of this. I mean, I'm not questioning anybody's ability to make these decisions. They certainly know much more about the subject matter than I do. But I'm just wondering, these were very complicated. Cindy was good enough to run some of these off for me because I was having trouble getting it on my computer. But, these are really big items coming from a smaller agency
Sure.
that didn't approve things this large. And I just wonder if, in fact, by state law, we are supposed to approve these. Are we supposed to actually dig into the different people who have bid, I presume these had 5 bids, each one of them, and
So I can probably answer your question for you. Consent calendar is comprised of staff or of either contracts or projects that are of a more routine nature. They're handled no differently than ones that we might do a department report, but they're considered more routine. And in fact, even in the consent calendar, you have a staff report attached to each one of the consent calendar items that elaborates the same process that we go through, whether it's a professional services contract on the consent calendar or a professional services contract that we do a department report for. It's done identically. But we consider these to be more routine because a lot of times there may be renewal of a contract. We might have an existing contract with a vendor that's expired and now we need to renew a contract. So, I understand the sticker shock, but we treat them the same way when we're processing them. The difference is that from a staff's perspective, we don't think it's going to require a lot of discussion, but there's always an option for a council member, if they have a question, to pull that item and we can have a discussion.
yeah,
So it's treated no differently.
when we become councilmen, we take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. I do think that the people, when they elect us, expect us to also be frugal. And I don't know if we're supposed to see the other, bids or the other.
Councilmember Jones, I appreciate your inquiry, but this is something that you can discuss with the staff.
Okay.
I don't necessarily know that it's on the agenda for us to educate on all of this at the moment. They'll answer all your questions. And granted, coming from a smaller organization to a larger one, $200 million as opposed to $20 million annual operating budget, they'll explain to you, as we've all received that same training, and they'll take time to do it. I just don't know this is the time or the place.
Process. I guess I'm saying, should we get involved at an earlier stage? And I hear you saying we shouldn't. So we should.
I can sit down with you and discuss council manager form of government and how cities operate and what the delegation is. I can sit down with you after the meeting.
Thank you. I didn't mean to hold up the meeting.
I appreciate the inquiry. I just know that it'll serve everyone better if you have a chance to ask those questions and we can cover it in full detail since it's not an agenda item. Is that okay with you?
Fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember. What we're going to do, item number 9 is a memorandum of understanding, but with permission, I would like to, which is the item, City Manager? Not the study session, yeah. I'd like to move item 11 up and have the commission board report, Council on Aging. We'd like to let you guys, so you have to wait through the whole meeting, so. Are you good with that? Do I need to get a vote on it, or are we good? No. All right, let's do it. Come on. You guys deserve it for all you do.
So happy. Wow, thank you.
You're most welcome.
So good evening, Mayor McCoy, council members, and city staff. My name is Karen Rohrbach, and I'm chair of the Thousand Oaks Council on Aging. And I'm going to go off script for just a moment and thank Rudy Gonzalez for his public comment this evening regarding the Ventura County Leadership Academy. I am a proud graduate of Cohort 4 from many years ago, Ventura County Leadership Academy, one of the best, most exciting learning experiences in my life. So if anyone wants to hear a little more about it, always happy to talk about VCLA.
And the training's being put to practice right here.
Absolutely. Well So I'm here this evening to present our annual report, which you have in your packet, and highlight some of the successes over the past year. You see in our report that we hosted a number of outstanding speakers on a variety of topics of interest to older adults during our monthly televised meeting, including heart care, emergency preparedness, the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, and the one that I listened to very, very carefully was about joint replacements. I listened with my shiny new hip. Special thanks to Commissioner Mortimer, who always works throughout the summer to prepare this series of speakers for the following year. We appreciate her work. In addition, we continue to serve as liaisons to various agencies from which we bring back information to the public during our televised meetings. Those include the Ventura County Area Agency on Aging, the Global Adult Community Center, and the Conejo Senior Volunteer Program. Per our resolution, the Council on Aging also continues to participate in outreach to learn the needs and concerns of citizens. One ongoing concern is transportation. To this end, we continue to host the Transit Training Education Series at the Goebel Center in partnership with volunteers from the original Senior Adult Master Plan Transit Team, Mobility Management Partners, the Thousand Oaks Transit, and MV Transit. This past year, additional trainings were also held at the Thousand Oaks Library. Each was well attended with a waiting list. Further, we also participated in the Wellness Festival, the Rotary Street Fair, the Goebel Center Luncheon, and community listening sessions at both Goebel and at Los Robles Hospital. As part of our original charge from the City Council, the Council on Aging provides a senior services directory for the community, which is now online. It's called Conejo Connections. We thank our commissioners and the community services staff for keeping it updated with a fresh new look. I think you will also find it interesting to learn that a new community organization operating as a private nonprofit evolved directly from the Senior Adult Master Plan. And although SAMP has sunset, the Conejo Valley Village celebrated its first anniversary last year and continues to help older adults throughout the Conejo Valley remain active and engaged in the community when they decide that they want to age in place. And one of its board members, Commissioner Tony Gitt, is also on the Council on Aging. In July 2018, Commissioner Gitt and I were elected by the Ventura County Area Agency on Aging to serve 4-year terms in the California Senior Legislature, representing Ventura County. I am serving as a senior senator, and Commissioner Gitt is an assembly member. The CSL currently is in the process of securing support for CSL's top legislative priorities for 2019 and will soon be developing new proposals for consideration for 2020. I believe this is the first time 2 CSL members representing Ventura County have hailed from Thousand Oaks. Looking ahead, we want to invite you to the Senior of the Year celebration on June 13th at 5 p.m. at the Goebel Center, truly one of the most inspirational highlights of my year. Thanks to Commissioner Maria, who organized last year's very successful event in which Nancy Healy was selected as Senior of the Year. And Commissioner Maria is organizing the event again this year. We thank her. In conclusion, the Commission on Aging desires to work more closely in partnership and thus more effectively with the City Council. According to the demographics collected by True North Research for the 2017 Community Attitude Survey, the older adult population continues to be the fastest growing demographic in Thousand Oaks. We are very interested in the future of our city and desire to help Thousand Oaks achieve its goals. Finally, we owe a debt of gratitude to our city liaison, Francine Spriegel, whose passion for people and leadership continues to provide the framework upon which we implement the really important work of this commission. Thank you for your time and consideration. And are there any questions?
Dr. Rohrbach, thank you for all you do on behalf of all the folks involved with this wonderful organization.
Thank you, Mayor.
Council members, if you have any questions or comments?
Okay, thank you very much.
Dr. Rohrbach, if you need me for anything, you guys want to have a session, just let me know.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much,
Thank
Mayor.
you again. All right, now we're going to get back on track. So you guys got priority. And let's see here. Heather Cousins, you're going to come and share with us about the Thousand Oaks Library. And thank you for being patient that we got to skip you for a season. So where are you?
I'm over here.
Oh, there you are. You're hiding.
Hi. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. It is my pleasure to present the Memorandum of Understanding between the city and the Friends of the Thousand Oaks Library. Yes. Yep. Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Okay. And just to give you a little bit of background, when the Friends organization was first founded in 1967, the Conejo Valley Friends of the Library was still affiliated with the county system. Then in 1988, a few years after we established our own independent library, the Friends amended their Articles of Incorporation, renaming themselves the Friends of the Thousand Oaks Library. Currently, the Friends is one of the library's largest allied support groups with 345 members, raising funds through the sale of gently used books and other donated items such as DVDs and CDs. Those funds help enhance a number of our most popular programs and services and have funded the purchase of items both in our physical and virtual libraries. While we've enjoyed an informal and very successful partnership, establishing a formal MOU is the best thing for both organizations, and it can ensure a solid future for both of us. With the goal of preserving the successful partnership, the Friends Board, City Attorney's Office, and library staff began working on this document in the spring of 2017. In short, it allows us to formalize the transparent and stable relationship we have established while still allowing both the city and Friends the flexibility to make changes as their operational needs change. This contract will enable us to meet the future with the same spirit of collaboration, cooperation, and success that have characterized our past. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
I just have to say, the aquarium at the library is amazing.
It is.
I just go there to relax, look at it. But thank you. Council members, do you have any questions? Or I'm not getting it. Let's see. No questions? Motion? Councilmember Adam?
All right. Thank you, Heather, for the report, and I will move the memorandum of understanding between the city and the Friends of the TO Library.
Madam Clerk? Do we need another?
Councilmember Engler?
Yes.
Councilmember Bill Della Pena?
Yes.
Councilmember Adam?
Yes.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Mayor McCoy?
Yes.
That motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Item number 10, study session. So we are not voting on anything tonight. We are going to listen and receive as much information as possible. I'd ask the council members after the presentation, let's hold all of our questions till the end of the presentation, write them down, and let's ask as many questions as possible to get a greater understanding, but let's give the presenters a time to lay it all out without interruption, if that'd be all right. Good? Thank you. All right. Take it away, folks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, members of the council. Tonight, as was just mentioned, is a study session on the general plan and update options for that plan. And now, before we get into more specifics, I did want to introduce the individual seated to my left. To my immediate left is Matt Ramey, who, as you know, you identified at your last city council meeting to provide guidance on this topic. Matt is a state leader in the area of general plan updates. His firm has completed or is engaged in approximately 12 general plan updates over the past decade. To Matt's left is Ms. Veronica Tam, who is also a state expert on the topic of housing elements, which I think you all recognize as a key part of any type of update that we may consider, that you may decide on. And then seated next to Ms. Tam is Peter Gilley, Community Development Deputy Director, and Mr. Gilley has been in the lead on this project over about the last year, so he is also a great source of information on the topic. So why don't I go ahead and lead off, and we are going to actually present this in sort of a tag team fashion. It's intended to be informal, and so we'll handle it that way. Tonight there's basically two parts of this topic, of this question that we wanted to go over. One is the background of the general plan as a planning tool, and related to that is some background on the Thousand Oaks General Plan, as well as what are some of the primary reasons why one would consider updating the general plan to begin with. And then once we are done with that, we will shift gears and talk about three fundamental options that you have before you in terms of updating all or portions of the general plan and related factors. And right now, by the way, again, tonight, no decisions, just information sharing. This item is tentatively scheduled to be brought back to you at your next meeting in 2 weeks on February 12th. So a little bit of background. I'll take the lead on this one on general plans. Wanted to start just to essentially make the point that we came to tonight's discussion after a variety of milestones over the past year. Staff provided a report to you last March on the topic. Last May, you provided direction to us to evaluate, update options, which we did, and brought that report back to you last September. At that time, you considered those options and authorized staff to solicit proposals for an update to the general plan, which we did. And as a result of that process, identified Ramey and Associates as the top consultant team. And then again, at your last meeting, you selected Ramey and Associates to advise you on this topic. So what is a general plan? At its most fundamental, it really is a vision about the future. And that vision has to be based on broad community engagement that results in a clear definition of community values and priorities. That's the heart of a general plan update. The value of it, and Mr. Ramey will talk about that in a few minutes. The heart of that is community involvement and engagement. Now, stepping down or going down a few thousand feet in elevation, but still at a high level, the purpose of a general plan is to provide that vision based on community input. General plan updates, when we talk about comprehensive updates, they normally have a 15-year horizon. So our original general plan adopted in 1970 had a horizon to 1985. That was the planning time frame for it. It is based extensively on state law, and Matt will talk about that later. And of course, it guides all of us, the community, staff, yourselves, Planning Commission, in terms of decisions regarding land use going forward. This slide, I know you've seen it before, but it just bears a moment of reflection. A general plan is composed of different elements, we call them, which are essentially topics. And those, in turn, as shown on the left side of this image, are composed of both required topics that the state of California requires that we discuss, that every city and county in the state discuss. You can see starting with land use and going all the way down, there's 8 topics that we need to address. And then every city and county has the option of adopting optional elements. And historically, to date, we have adopted 6 elements that reflect the community's values, going back to where we just started with that initial slide. These are topics that historically in Thousand Oaks have been of importance to the community forest, public buildings, etc. The images on the right side of this slide show 3 elements that we updated more or less recently. We updated open space and conservation in 2013 and safety in 2014. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about the Thousand Oaks General Plan. As I just mentioned, it was adopted in 1970, and that document, which was really an excellent document to initially guide the city going forward, focused on 3 areas: land use, circulation, and housing. Those were key elements. The city was looking at very rapid growth, population, and development growth, and so the general plan focused on those areas. other elements, as you'll see in a moment, were adopted over the next 4 years. So our original general plan and all of its elements weren't all adopted at the same point in time. There were several that were, but then others were staggered after that. And then over the years, we've both updated individual elements in their entirety on an occasional basis, and then we, of course, amend individual elements on an as-needed basis in response to specific changes, such as a change in land use from institutional to residential or commercial to institutional. Those would be reflected as an amendment on the land use map. This slide, I think, is interesting because it compares where we were in 1970 and where we are today. And if you just look at a few variables between the 2 points in time, when we adopted our first general plan, the population, as you can see, a little bit over 34,000 residents. Today, we're over 132,000. Vacant land, according to our original general plan, 79% of it, almost 80% was vacant, whereas today it's approximately 5% in terms of vacant developable land. Not open space, but just vacant developable land. Residential land, 10% back in 1970. It's increased over the years, over the past almost 50 years, to 45%. Golf courses, parks, and open space areas. Very interesting because originally the general plan didn't envision an extensive public natural open space system. It was really parks and golf courses, 2% in 1970. And as you know, today that figure is almost half of the city land area, 45%, when you combine those three land uses. And then another interesting difference between the two plans, just to illustrate, and this is the main point here, illustrate how communities and general plans evolve over time. The original general plan envisioned our open space system really being composed of parks, golf courses, and very low density residential lots would actually comprise the open space system, and it would therefore be primarily private in ownership. Over the past 50 years, that has changed, and as you know, almost our entire open space system is publicly owned. This is a chart that shows in 5-year increments the elements when they were initially adopted, shown in yellow on the left side generally, and then the updates in the amber color. So as you can see on the left side, again, these are not 1-year increments, but 5. You can see land use, circulation, housing adopted as part of the original general plan in 1970. Then you can see how most of the other elements, both required and optional, were adopted over the next few years. And then you can see to the right other updates to those elements over the years. And if you look just on the update side, the amber colored notations, you can see that housing, if you look at that, per state requirements, cities are required to update them on a regular basis. We've updated our housing element 8 times since 1970. And then you can also see, if you look at the 95 to 1999 bracket, this one right here, you can see we updated open space, safety, conservation at one time, and then land use and circulation a year later. And then over here, you can see that we updated 4 elements within basically a 2-year period. And here were all of the housing elements that I just mentioned. So when you look at the general plan, you recognize in this image that it's composed of a variety of elements, 13 in total, that were updated more or less near the same point in time, but then have been updated more or less incrementally since then.
What are we saying? Do we understand them thoroughly?
So in terms of our current general plan, a few highlights based on the update schedule. Many of our elements are currently out of date. They're in need of revisiting. A number of new issues are not reflected in our general plan, issues such as resilience, health, affordable housing, et cetera. And then, of course, the current general plan does not, because we haven't updated the land use and other key elements in over 20 years does not reflect recent planning efforts. The downtown specific plan, the Vision 2064 program, and other activities that cross department boundaries. And then finally, our general plan, to be candid, is really not that user-friendly. It's composed of a number of different physically separate documents. They're not part of one document. They're not prepared in the same format. Graphics are completely different between many of the elements. It's somewhat difficult to navigate through our general plan. I wanted to also mention the general plan update in relation to Measure E, Thousand Oaks growth measure. I just wanted to emphasize that Measure E remains fully in effect through this process, no matter which option you decide to go forward with. And one of the key aspects of the general plan update is the opportunity to bring residential capacity down to a more realistic number that reflects as-built densities that we see in our neighborhoods. I mentioned the Visioning 2064 project. I know several council were involved in that in the past, and this was a program that city council, residents, staff were involved in. I was involved in this, and I thought that it was very interesting. It solicited, I think, a lot of very positive and productive comments from residents of the community. The program had over 30 community meetings and looked at these areas that are bulleted here, from municipal services down through economy, environment, and infrastructure. And the results of that effort are in a final report, which has what we termed guiding principles that looked out in terms of the next 50 years and what should be the guiding principles for the city going forward. Many of those, I think, would be a great starting point for any kind of general plan update. So with that overview, I am going to now pass the presentation on to Mr. Ramey, who's going to talk about some of the primary reasons for considering an update to the general plan. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Thank you for having us back here. Before I jump into the part of the presentation, I want to take a minute and recognize some members of our team who are here, who are some topical experts who can really help answer questions during the discussion. So first, we have Simran Malhotra, who is a principal with Ramey and Associates. She would be helping out a lot on the plan. To her right is Melissa Johnson Stark, who some of you may recognize. She worked on the downtown master plan, and she is also born and raised here in Thousand Oaks. Then to her right, we have Greg Martin from Rincon, who is an expert in environmental impact reports and open space. To his right is Chester Britt from Ariano Associates, and they are experts in community engagement. And then we also have one row back here, Amitabh Barthakor from HRNA, who is an expert in economics. And then, of course, to my left is Veronica Tam with Veronica Tam and Associates, who I think no one in the state knows more about housing law than she does.
First of all, thank you for bringing all these folks. This is going to be real helpful tonight.
You're welcome.
Thanks for doing that, Mr. Ramey.
Hopefully we'll be able to answer just about any and all questions you have this evening. And if not, we'll bring them back on the 12th or whenever the next meeting is. I want to start. I'm actually going to, I'm far enough away from Peter that I'm going to go off script for a second here, so he can't reach out and grab me. I'm always amazed at city council meetings when I come to them, to listen to the range of comments and the range of topics that come up. Because as a practitioner who works on general plans, just about every topic that comes up really relates to a general plan. because the general plan is the constitution, the overall constitution of the community. And so, everything that came up tonight from the library system to the Boy Scouts who just left, who hopefully would get engaged in the effort, now or in the future, to the Ventura County Leadership Alliance, where their list of topics actually read like the elements of a general plan. I'm always amazed at how the importance that a general plan can really take in the community if used properly. And so, sort of with that as the backdrop, I want to jump in here and just start with going over, and what I'm going to talk about is just a few of the benefits that a general plan, an up-to-date general plan, can have. And, as we are going to later talk about 3 different options, a housing element focus only option, a focused update, and a comprehensive update. So this really, the benefits, the range of benefits that you get that I'm going to talk about vary based on which option that you pick. So just sort of know that now as we're going into it. And so the 5 benefits that we're going to touch on, one is to the purpose of the general plan and what it can really achieve is to helping to preserve and enhance the quality of life in the community. And at its core, that's really what the general plan is about. The second is to ensure long-term fiscal sustainability. The third is to proactively take control of housing decisions. And Veronica will talk about that, particularly related to the large number of new state legislation that has happened and is expected to happen in the future. The fourth is to incorporate state-required general plan regulations, and there have been quite a few. And then the fifth, and I think along with the first, I think it's really one of the most important, is to have a community conversation about the future. So starting off, the first in terms of preserving and enhancing the quality of life in the city. So there are, at its core, a general plan is about identifying the aspects of the community that people love and want to preserve. It's about identifying the issues or threats to the quality of life, and then making sure that those issues are addressed and that the quality of life in the community is maintained in the future. And so, at its core, that's really what the general plan is about. And general plans can, as we talked about previously, can be organized in any number of ways, but it's really trying to achieve the preservation and enhancement of quality of life in a community through land use, transportation, parks, open space, conservation, through all of these topics. So some of the ones that we know are really critical to the community are strengthening and preserving open space and natural areas in the community. There's a need to really look at and mitigating natural hazards, fire and earthquake, and now there's new state requirements that we'll talk about for climate change and adaptation. General plans are also really an opportunity. They focus a lot on land use and transportation. So really an opportunity to identify areas of the community that should remain stable and areas of a community that could evolve over time, that maybe could have development added or could be different at some point in the future. And in a community like Thousand Oaks, this identification of areas of stability is absolutely critical and really the most important starting point in the process. Because again, it's about identifying what's cherished in the community and making sure that those aspects or those physical places are preserved and enhanced. There are other topics that really could be addressed in the general plan about preserving and enhancing the quality of life, including implementing the vision of the downtown, expanding a focus on arts and culture, and I believe the existing general plan doesn't actually mention it very much at this point. There is a need to talk about expanding the biotech industry and other economic development activities, addressing sustainability and public health, and expanding the multimodal transportation network. So again, these are all aspects of topics that could be discussed in the general plan that would preserve and enhance the quality of life. The second benefit of updating the general plan is to ensure long-term fiscal sustainability. Without going into too much detail at this point in the presentation, and we can circle back to this, and Amitabh can answer questions about this, but there's a strong tie between the land use decisions that a community makes, the fiscal sustainability in the long term of the community, and then the public services that are provided by the community. And quite simply, the land use decisions can impact in positive or negative ways the amount of revenue coming into the city, and so that impacts fiscal sustainability, and things, of course, change over time. And then we want to make sure costs are always going up for the provision of public services. So we want to make sure that revenues are coming into the city that enable the community and the city to provide the continued high level of public services that you have now. And so that's why the fiscal sustainability is really important, to look at holistically in the city rather than on project-by-project decisions. And general plans really give you the opportunity to do this. The next is to proactively take control of housing decisions. And I'm going to turn it over to Veronica to talk about this.
Thank you. Good evening. Staff and Matt asked me to talk about the housing element, and particularly the challenges that you may face in the upcoming cycle of the housing element update. As staff mentioned, this housing element is part of your general plan. It's part of the 8 required elements. The thing that is different from the rest of the general plan is that the housing element is established by state law to be updated periodically. There is a set schedule. You cannot miss that schedule. The next update that we're looking at is October 15, 2021, and there's a slight grace period, but you really cannot miss that deadline. The other thing that sets the housing element apart from the rest of the general plan is that it has to be reviewed by a state agency for compliance with state law. The agency responsible for that review is the State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. While it looks at, HCD looks at the entire housing element, but the most critical component of HCD's review is something called the regional housing needs allocation. Now, by definition, by name, regional housing needs allocation is the share of the region's housing needs that the city of Thousand Oaks has to be responsible for. Every single jurisdiction in the state is given an allocation, and you must find ways to accommodate that through providing adequate sites with appropriate densities and development standards. There's virtually no jurisdiction that can get a housing element that's deemed compliant with state law without meeting this regional housing needs allocation. Now, if you're unable to find adequate sites for this particular arena, housing element update, that shortfall actually rolls over as a penalty for the following regional housing needs allocation or the housing element update. Really the challenge that we're going to face in this next update is that the regional housing needs allocation is going to be larger than last time. It's expected to be larger, not only because we are in a growing state compared to last cycle when we were in a kind of recession, but also because there's been a lot of changes to state law that really put stringent requirements for meeting the regional housing needs allocation. One being the fact that if you don't have production, if your housing growth was limited in the past cycle, the past few years, it's not a justification for getting a lower number for the regional housing needs allocation. It also means that state law, new state law allows your neighbors to appeal your draft number. When you receive your draft regional housing needs allocation from SCAG, your neighbors can appeal your number if they feel that it's not an equitable share within the region. So updating the housing element this round, we really anticipate that the city would need to revisit its land use policies and looking at its growth management policies and deciding, in order to meet your regional housing needs allocation, where in your community would be the best location to accommodate that and in what way. As I mentioned before, there's virtually no jurisdiction that can have a housing element that complies with state law without meeting the regional housing needs allocation. Now, what does that mean when you don't have a housing element that complies with state law? It basically renders your general plan invalid because your housing element is an integral component of your general plan. When you have an integral component of your general plan being out of compliance with state law, it renders your entire general plan invalid. It also means that you would not be eligible for some state funds. Increasingly, the State Housing and Community Development Department is putting more state funds that are in their control to be contingent upon your compliance with state law. If you're not complying with state law, you would not be eligible to apply. One being the state SB2 funds that functions almost like a block grant. As long as you apply, you will get it. But if you don't have a compliant housing element, you will not be eligible to apply. Litigation. New state law also allows the state agency, HCD, to refer any non-compliant jurisdiction to the state attorney general, and the state attorney general can bring litigation against the community. And lastly, one of the things that happens with communities is that if the housing element is out of compliance, then the SB 35 that was passed in 2017 automatically kicks in. That requires jurisdictions to do streamlines their multifamily approval, being ministerial with no discretionary review. So there's been about 10 projects in the states that are processing under SB 35 right now. That actually concludes my portion of the presentation. I'll pass it back to Matt.
Okay, thanks, Veronica. Veronica was clearly talking about one aspect of the general plan. One thing that has happened, that happens every year, but actually more so recently, is that the state is coming up with new laws all the time, and new laws that must be incorporated into the general plan. This slide here, I apologize if you can't read it. There's a lot. This is mostly in the last 10 years. The housing is really in the last few years overall. But there are a lot of new, new in quotes, state legislation that needs to be integrated into the general plan. And so the reality is that there are because of the time, as Mark talked about, the time frame at which the general plan has been updated over time, there are quite a number of state laws that are not incorporated into and reflected in the plan. And so, as Veronica said, the plan is at this point out of compliance with state law. The topics here, really, there's a lot about housing. Relatively recently, there's and I'll talk about this in a second, but a new requirement for environmental justice. There's requirements for complete streets to make sure that all the entire transportation network is not just for cars, but for cars and bikes and pedestrians. So it's more of a balanced transportation system. There have been quite a number of recent legislations around safety, fire, flooding. And then also around climate change and resilience. There are requirements for consulting with Native American tribes in the process and establishing relationships. There are CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act requirements. So there's a lot that really has happened here that needs to be reflected in the plan. One of the ones to mention, is the environmental justice element, and this actually was adopted in 2016. And the idea is that general plans need to take into consideration those in the community who typically who have disproportionate health burdens. And so the environmental justice element, this can be called any number of things, but environmental justice element needs to be incorporated into the general plan when two or more elements are updated on or after January 1st, 2018. It can be, as I said, it doesn't have to be called the environmental justice element. It can be called community health. It can be a separate element, or it can be incorporated into other elements. But this is a relatively new and an important requirement that will be part of general plans. Our preliminary analysis, it really is limited. All communities have to look at this, but it's limited to areas of the community or cities that have populations that are disproportionately impacted. And based on our preliminary assessment, the city of Thousand Oaks actually does have areas that are subject to SB 1000. The fifth benefit, and again, I think this is probably one of the most important benefits of a general plan, is it really allows the community to have a conversation about the future. The original general plan, land use and circulation, was adopted in 1970. It's a beautiful document. The community has changed over time, as Mark talked about, and the general plan really provides that opportunity for the community to come together and be visionary about what the community should be. And that's probably the process that happened in 1970 as well, and leading up to 1970. It's really important. We really ask these questions at the beginning of what is important to the community today. We really start with that in the process to make sure that everything, that the entire community's voice is heard in this process. We ask where are areas of stability? Where should there be no land use changes? We ask for questions of where, if there is going to be change, and we know that change is always happening, and we heard that with the 7-Eleven conversation today. If there are going to be changes, what are the areas where those changes should happen, where land uses should happen, and then what should the change look like? What should the uses be that are there? Or should it be mixed use? Should it be commercial? How big should it be? Those are some of the questions that we ask throughout the process. A lot of the time that we spend on a general plan is not necessarily just doing the technical work, and there certainly is a lot of that, but a lot of it is really engaging with the community to have this community conversation. The general plan is really an opportunity. I'm always impressed and surprised at the ability of a general plan process to bring the community together, to develop new leaders in the community, to hear new voices, and that's really what this would be about. It's about empowering the community in the decision-making process. It's about building local capacity, transparency, and community connectedness. And we embark on a process where we start with listening and learning. We outreach to the community to make sure that we're telling as many people as possible about the process, because we don't want the future to be decided by a small number. We want the future to be decided by as many people as possible coming together. We engage the community, we seek input, and then we allow the community to be part of the decision-making process. There's a lot of techniques that we use to do this. We call our process, we think about it as high tech, low touch, and low touch, high tech. So we think about all of these different ways of engaging the community, because everybody learns differently. And so we'd have a website, we'd have online surveys, we'd have stakeholder meetings, focus groups, community forums, public workshops, pop-up workshops. Again, the goal here is to make sure that as many people as possible are engaged in the process of thinking about the future of the community, of identifying what in the community they like and want to preserve, and what are the issues that need to be addressed. As we talked about, it's also the opportunity to think about what trade-offs need to be made. When you think about fiscal resources, you need to, as I mentioned earlier, there's a trade-off between the types of uses coming in and the revenues that they generate, and then a direct line between that and the public services that are provided. So it allows, in the general plan process, it allows you to make these connections that you don't necessarily get to make all the time. It's also an opportunity. You did this great engagement through the 2064 visioning process. Engagement here would really build off of that, because there is a lot of great information that came out of that process. As I also want to just kind of talk about some successes that of general plans, because I know that there is some, it's a general plan is a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. But from my professional experience, I know it can produce tremendous benefits for a community. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of projects just very quickly and highlight a few things that may be of interest to you all. One is the Hermosa Beach General Plan. You all know probably Hermosa Beach. It's a kind of a quintessential California community. They're I'm very proud of what they have. They're very concerned about change in the community. And so in this process, we led an engagement effort that was really focused, again, on starting really with the values in the community. And here there was so much time spent on cataloging the great things in the community and then identifying the neighborhoods and the areas that they said, no, absolutely no change here. We love this the way it is. And then there are other areas where they said, yeah, you know what, this actually isn't really what we want it to be in the future. And so through the process, we were able to engage in a conversation about this really difficult question of growth and identify a very limited amount of growth in the community, but one that would produce benefits for the residents, both now as well as in the next 20 to 30 years, because the general plan is really about the next generation of people living in the community. The next example is the Mountain View General Plan. And actually, this is where years ago I actually met Peter Gilley when Peter was working there and we were working on the general plan. What was really amazing to me about this process was we were really able to identify a few select areas where growth was going to go and tie that growth to benefits that the community would get. And so for those who don't know, in the sort of if you see the map on the right, the purple area up top is actually where a small little company called Google has their headquarters. And so a lot of this was, capitalizing on the technology and the high-tech industries that are here in Mountain View, and then trying to balance the growth in technology and the jobs with issues like traffic congestion, with housing affordability, and with quality of life. And what happened here was really a very clear identification of what growth would happen in different areas and exactly what that would be and the benefits that would come out of that growth. And there was a very large engagement process, and people, hundreds of people came out to community meetings to talk about this, and people got to then really create their own city and were able to make these trade-offs. The next example is the city of East Palo Alto. This community, from a sort of a size and a demographic standpoint, is very different than Thousand Oaks. But what was really incredible here was that there were a lot of questions about the type of growth that would happen in this community, and there was a lot of concern about gentrification. And I think that actually with this process, for any project I've ever worked on, had just about the most amount of engagement. But what it did, which was really powerful, was it actually enabled, through all of this engagement and the education, it enabled a whole new generation of community leaders to rise up and think about what their community would be like. And people who were engaged in the general plan, who were part of the general plan process, are now members of the Planning Commission. And are really active in the community. And so it was really a powerful way to think about a general plan as being able to produce a real benefit for the community. And then the last one is West Hollywood. And this one I really wanted to point out because we did really identify what we called the areas of stability and the areas of change. And the areas of stability, as you can see here, those are primarily the residential areas of the community. And what was really decided was that there would be a very limited amount of development really consistent with existing zoning in that area. And in some places, it was actually downzoned to match what the land uses were on the ground. And then instead, a limited amount of growth was focused on the transportation corridor. So it was really focused in a limited number of areas. And that actually enabled really a community conversation. Once we took off to took off the table part of the conversation to say your neighborhood is going to be stable, and what we're going to do is we're going to focus growth on areas, and we're going to try and make sure that you get benefits from it. And in fact, the land use regulations were structured such that there was a base amount of development and then a bonus, so that anything in the bonus, the community would get a benefit from that, to make sure that development was clearly tied to benefits. So those are just 4 examples. I want to shift gears a little and talk about the 3 options that we want to bring forward to you as possibilities for the general plan update process. So the 3 options are the housing element and then other required updates, a focus update, and a comprehensive update. And I'll just walk through the differences between these. And I apologize. I know it can get a little bit technical here. And so, when we get to the end of this, if you have questions or want me to go back, I'm happy to continue to describe these. So the first option is the housing element and other required elements. As you'll see here, we can't just do a housing element. We can't just say, we're going to update the housing element and that's the end, because once you start doing one, it's kind of like a thread that you pull. Things start to unravel and you have to do more and more requirements per state law. So what this option would entail is updating the housing element, and as Veronica mentioned, meeting the RHNA numbers would probably require changes to land use designations in the city to accommodate the housing that would be required per state law. And then once you do that, you're of course getting into some of these conversations about where does growth go and what does it look like. There is also a requirement for what's called disadvantaged communities, or SB 244, for county islands. And this requirement, the city would actually, upon the update of its next housing element, the city is going to have to do an analysis of county islands and look at potentially how those county islands can be incorporated into the city, and really, or ways to bring up the quality of life for residents in those areas. And to clarify, county islands are areas that are county land completely surrounded by the city, and the city of Thousand Oaks does have county islands. The next piece of this would be the safety element. The safety element was last updated in 2014, which doesn't seem that long ago, but of course the state actually has made some changes and some requirements since then, which is to add climate change and resilience, and that needs to be done by January 1st, 2022, which essentially lines up pretty close with the timing that the housing element needs to be done. Then, because you are updating 2 or possibly 3 elements, that triggers the need to do an environmental justice element, or to address the topics of environmental justice. So this option wouldn't just be housing, it would be housing plus some changes to land use, plus some changes to safety, and doing environmental justice. And of course, there's always CEQA review, as well as whatever level of engagement you would want to see out of this. The next is the focused update option. In this option, the city would update comprehensively the housing element, the land use element, the circulation element, and once you update the circulation element is when you have to address things like complete streets, which is the complete streets requirement, the environmental justice element, and then, while not required, but given its importance, we also would recommend adding a strong focus on economic development. And here, in the focused update, it would be integrated into the land use element rather than as a standalone economic development element. And then we also would need to update the safety element, as I mentioned, to deal with climate change and resilience. Your head spinning yet for these options? Then the last one, this one's simple in comparison. Essentially, we would look at the entire, and actually, let me go back to the focused update. All of the other elements would essentially remain the same. So you would have a standalone conservation element, a standalone open space element, the noise element from 2000 would remain the same. Community forests would be under a separate cover. Social, scenic highways, public buildings, public services, recreation, all of these would remain the same as they are now under the focused option. And then the third option is the comprehensive update. And this is where we actually look at the entire general plan and pull everything together under a single cover. Clearly, the work that's been done recently on safety, on open space conservation and community forests would be incorporated into it, but it would be brought in so it would be as if it would read like the other elements, so that you could actually have a single document that you would pick up and it would be consistent from cover to cover. And so, all of the elements would be touched, some more so and some less so. And with this, the optional elements of, I mentioned community forests, but social, scenic highways, public buildings, public services, these could be integrated into other elements, or they could be deleted in their entirety if you all felt like it was necessary to do that. And with a comprehensive update, there is also the possibility to add sustainability topics, new elements like sustainability or arts and culture. Of course, you could do that on any Tuesday. You could add an element, but this would really be the opportunity to again look at the plan in its entirety. Of course, an EIR would be required for this Vcla review, and also this would entail actually both the focused and the comprehensive. We'd recommend a very comprehensive community engagement process, because again, engaging the community in these decisions is really one of the most critical aspects. It also, as you know, takes a lot of time and energy to do. Just a few comments on CEQA considerations. So the California Environmental Quality Act, the focused and the comprehensive update would absolutely require an environmental impact report. Traffic impact analysis, traffic analysis is going to be part of that, and there's new state law that you actually have to do what's called vehicle miles traveled analysis. There's new guidance on that, so that would need to be brought into this. We would also recommend that, given the level of change that's happening even in the housing element plus other required changes, that an EIR would be advisable to do, because the EIR really provides significant protection against legal challenges. It's my understanding that the 1970 plan actually didn't have an EIR associated with it, so it really would be advisable to do an EIR with any of these options, and just to make sure that you have legal coverage, and especially because with the housing element option, you're going to be touching multiple elements. There's the potential for there's probably going to be land use changes in certain areas. So with those changes, we would really recommend that the environmental impact report occur.
Thank you, Matt. This is actually our last image in tonight's presentation, and the goal is to look at several of the benefits that Matt just mentioned from a general plan update, see how those vary across the three options that were just described, and then talk about time frame and cost as well. For instance, if we think about the broad variable of quality of life, that would be more limited if we're looking at a housing and related element update. Obviously, as you go from that more limited option to the focused option, where elements would be updated in their entirety, that topic becomes, by definition, broader because more issues are dealt with, and they're dealt with in greater depth, and then it reaches its greatest potential scope in the comprehensive. In terms of community vision, where I sort of started off my comments tonight, clearly there is a component of that to the housing and related element update. But again, like quality of life, I would posit that increases in breadth and depth as one goes from focus to a comprehensive update. Compliance with state laws is simply a factor of the scope of the update, whatever option the council chooses. That those elements will clearly be in compliance with state law. In terms of time frame, The housing and related elements, the process to update those would take about a year and a half. And that would begin in earnest as we begin to get numbers from SCAG in terms of what the city's arena numbers might be. But that would be the approximate time frame. The focused and the comprehensive update both would require 2.5 years. And that's basically from about where we're at right now to get the housing element and the other elements done in both options in time for a submittal to the state by October 15th of 2021. Finally, in terms of cost, preliminary estimates for these three options are shown at the bottom of this slide. The housing and related elements cost is approximately $800,000. The cost for a focused update, approximately $1.3 million, and for a comprehensive update, $1.5 million. And the heart of these costs across the board typically are community engagement and, of course, the EIR, at least for the focus and comprehensive, and most likely would be the best course of option even for the housing and related elements. Now, when we do talk about cost, I think it is important to recognize that this is a document. If council were to opt for the focused or comprehensive, that essentially looks out 15 years. So those costs, I think, realistically can be amortized over that time frame. The actual costs can be met in several different ways. There is a source of state grant funding for a portion of the focused and comprehensive updates. That could be tapped in the range of about $250,000. The general plan could be utilized, of course, at council's discretion. And then finally, another option that council could consider is a long-range planning fee based on building permit valuation. We already have a fee. It's a very small percentage of the value of building permits that is imposed to pay for technical upgrades to our building division processes. That could be applied, and depending on the level of that, even at a comparatively small level, it could pay for the bulk of the costs to update the general plan. So with that, staff is available for questions. Matt and Veronica, the entire team here, we're at your disposal. You have a great team and two of the top state experts on general plans and housing elements, so I would encourage a range of questions.
Thank you so much. Just to remind the council that tonight we're not deciding on either of the three options. We're simply gaining understanding so that we can make a decision at our next council meeting. And to keep in mind that with the state usurping our autonomy in a greater capacity, we need to come up with some sort of a plan to stay ahead of that. And hopefully some of the questions tonight, I would hope that if it's my understanding with HCD, it doesn't recognize local growth control measurements, or measures like Measure E, and that's concerning. So I welcome the questions. Let's ask as many as we can tonight so that we can really get an understanding for a decision next week. Who would like to go first? Councilmember Engler.
Thank you, Mayor. Quick question, I think to Matt probably is the source for this one. I think unfortunately named environmental justice title, can you go into what that is and why it's important for us to look into that?
Yeah, with any of these topics, there's a lot of background to it. It really evolved out of a movement of creating healthy communities, and along with that movement of creating healthy communities was the recognition that some populations bear a disproportionate impact of health and environmental burdens such as pollution. And so the state actually just recently issued draft guidance for SB 1000 for the environmental justice element, but really it is supposed to look at the areas within a community that have a disproportionate pollution burden, that is, are near to different sources of pollution. It looks at areas where the income level is low relative to the entire state, and it looks at levels of poverty. And there's different ways of sort of measuring this, and the state really is just coming out with this guidance, which is why it's not possible to definitively say, yes, the city does. However, we actually have been working with some folks to identify where there's a software package, and they have been working with the state, and they have looked at the draft guidance, and we've been able to get that data, and there are areas in the city that look like they are subject to this. So the city would be required to do environmental justice. It looks at disproportionate pollution burden. It looks at health outcomes. It looks at income disparities. And as I mentioned, environmental justice isn't necessarily the best term for this. And you really just have to look at the topics. You can incorporate it into other elements. You can call it healthy communities if you want, so long as you are addressing the topics of concern.
Good? Okay. Councilmember Bill de la Pena.
Thank you, Mayor McCoy. I have a few questions, starting with the economic development element that you were suggesting should be included in land use. Now, economic development in Thousand Oaks, as with other cities, is pretty wide-ranging. It includes culture and the arts. I'm wondering whether the economic development element should be included or integrated with land use, or separately to include culture and arts, because culture and arts are not required by the state, but certainly very important to Thousand Oaks and other communities. Is that something that could be done separately?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the state has 8 required elements, and when the state says they have 8 required elements, it doesn't mean that you have to have a topic for each of those 8 or a chapter for each of those 8. And you also can add any topic that you want. And it is really up to each jurisdiction to organize the general plan in any way that you want and to include topics, any number of topics that you want. And in fact, before we just mentioned environmental justice, before this actually became law, for 10 plus years, practitioners like myself were creating healthy communities elements that dealt with those same topics, and then it became state law. So, yes, there's a very strong connection between economic development and arts and culture. If you wanted, you could do a separate economic development element, a separate arts and culture element. You can combine the two together. It's really up to you. And I think ultimately, part of the conversation is, should you choose to whichever path you choose, whether it's the housing, a more housing focused, a focused or a comprehensive, to make sure that we understand what are the topics that you want to incorporate in, and then we can just organize it however you want them.
Well, since the City of Thousand Oaks has not done a general plan update, and there are now state mandated elements, it makes sense to me to do a comprehensive plan, since the price difference between a focused and comprehensive plan is really not as much versus just doing the existing elements. I'm not sure whether I'd like to pay just $800,000, but I'm not sure whether it gets us to where we need to be in this day and age. I also wanted to mention the environmental justice, as is a term that to me doesn't really encompass everything in the city of Thousand Oaks, or everyone. We don't have people living next to landfills or a sewage plant or anything like that. So, but I feel that we all, regardless of income, we all breathe the same air, we drink the same water, and so we all need to be treated the same. So healthy communities or community health would be a much better term than environmental justice. Obviously, it says Measure E would continue to be in effect, but as Mayor McCoy said, the state is not really recognizing growth control measures. That is a problem. And regarding housing, in my opinion, communities have different needs. One size does not fit all. And to be forced to come up with certain numbers of housing units is something that I have protested for many years. It's something that I'm in complete disagreement with the state. Perhaps it's time for the cities in California to take a stand against the RENA numbers. We have to take action. We cannot continue to let Sacramento dictate as to what we need to do in our communities. And I hear that there are housing units available in the Inland Empire, homes that have been built, thousands of homes that are now vacant. They're not being occupied. And there is a housing crisis. I realize that. And that is leading to homelessness. And we're dealing with homelessness as well. But again, I think the state should give us the freedom to do what we can to help our communities and our neighbors. That said, I know we're not really taking any action other than direction, but with all of the elements that need to be updated, I believe that a comprehensive plan update would be best at the moment.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Adam?
Yeah, I did understand we weren't taking any action tonight. Question period, right?
Right.
Okay, very good. So before I start, just for to anchor us as to what we're talking about, this all started, I don't know, maybe a year ago, maybe a little longer, when we had the debate about Measure E. And as it says in the staff report, the 1996 General Plan Land Use Element Map that serves as the basis of Measure E allows more growth in the city than is reasonably expected. That was the point of debate, and the idea of looking at the general plan was to, in fact, realign those numbers with what is reasonably expected. Would that be correct?
That is where the discussion began. That's correct.
Okay. Just want to ground us in that situation. So, to answer that question, would in fact a comprehensive update of the housing and land use elements answer that question? Those would be the two elements that would apply to that debate, would they not?
So if council were to update the
So I'm just asking if those would be the two elements that would be relevant to that debate. I mean, it certainly wouldn't be scenic highways, correct?
No, but
it wouldn't be arts and leisure. It wouldn't be recreation. It would it not be those two elements?
Be land use and housing?
Yeah.
Yes, the difference.
Okay, that's what I'm getting at.
Right.
Yes.
So what I was just thinking of was that the land use changes, so that we're clear, that would result from just a housing element focus would be those land use changes as needed to accommodate RENA.
Okay. Well, yeah, we can get in, drill down into all the mechanics of it. I'm just trying to establish the fact that we started out with a question, and those two elements, comprehensively updated, would be where that question would be answered.
As long as the land use element update looked beyond RENA, looked at the whole city.
Okay, I'll give you that. But those are the two elements. Okay. Secondly, the state has been mentioned a number of times here, and I can certainly understand why. There's talk that the transportation dollars could be withheld for failure to build enough homes. There's talk about building around transit hubs. There's talk about a lot of density. There's talk about linking housing and transportation. There's talk about a lot of what we might consider to be punitive measures to try to get us to build housing. Whereas, you know, like any city, we want to build where we want to build and what we want to build. Okay, so to me, the biggest issue we're looking at right now is the direction the state is going and how we should respond as a community. So let me get back to the question again. To respond to the state and some of these measures that they're proposing, would the housing and land use comprehensive update respond? That would be the elements that would respond to the state, would it not? The same two elements that would also respond to why we have excessive housing numbers that we're not using.
Those two elements would be pivotal to respond to this. But I just want to say, because these elements, as we mentioned, are interrelated. And so as we talk about land use and so forth, that could have corresponding changes on elements such as circulation and so
potentially. But it's certainly not going to be social, scenic highways, recreation, public buildings.
That's correct.
Okay, good. That's what I'm trying to get at. You know, what are we trying to do here? Why are we here, and what are we trying to do? And in my mind, we're here to answer a question that came up about a year ago, and probably the number one priority right now is to respond to the state of California with a well-thought-out housing proposal that shows how we can comply and build where we want to build, what we want to build. And again, we're back to those two elements. All right. I just wanted to establish that. I just make a point here. You know, I've been sitting here for about 6 years now, and it was mentioned in the presentation that one of the benefits is we could revision our boulevard and our downtown. Just a point to be made here. We have done that extensively and at great cost. We started in 2011 with a boulevard-specific plan. We've also put together a downtown master plan for our core. We're embarking on a campus master plan as well. And we went through over a year's process with a Visioning 2064 endeavor that cost, I'm not sure how much, and involved over 26 staff members and 5 council members. So it's not like we've been sitting on our hands. We have embarked on a lot of the things that you've mentioned in your presentation. So, you know, I'm just looking at cost and I'm looking at redundancy. You know, it just seemed to me that we don't want to go back and do what we've already done over again. That's just a statement. I don't need a comment. Just a statement. Let me just get a couple more things here. Sorry, Mayor. As far as the EIR, it's a costly procedure, time-consuming, and can be quite controversial, and even in some cases transmuted into a situation that can be actually used against projects, as you all well know. You say in the report that the EIR would be required for the comprehensive update, and I could see that. I don't know if the state requires it or not, but you also say it would be required for the focus and just the RENA number update. But I'm taking that to mean not necessarily required, but you're suggesting it might be optional or preferential to have that. There's no set requirements stating we need to do an EIR for focused update, is there? There's nothing in the law that says, City of Thousand Oaks, if you're going to do focused update, you got to do a full EIR.
Are you asking me the legal question? Okay.
Actually, no. Just a simple yes or no.
The state does not dictate in terms of a general plan update the exact environmental document. That is a decision made by the local jurisdiction based on the topics being updated, the extent of those updates, and related law.
That's what I'm getting at. I just want people to understand that maybe an ERR might be preferential, maybe it might be optional, but it's not required. And one of the biggest costs in this thing is, in fact, the EIR. Okay? And again, I'm not even sure it's required for the comprehensive. And I'm not necessarily saying it's not the right way to go. I just want everybody to understand it's not state mandated. We don't have to do an EIR. Maybe we should, but I want that out there. Also, on the time and the cost of the comprehensive versus focus versus the housing element, the staff report actually says the difference between the comprehensive and the focus is $375,000. Tonight you're saying $200,000. And Matt, you told me when we spoke earlier you were going to have a revised number for the focused in time and cost.
Yeah, I mean, we went.
Did you revise it upward?
No, we went back and looked at the numbers with it. I think our report originally was a difference of 1.4 versus 1.5 was what our original proposal was. So I believe we actually went down in that number from what we had previously. So what we would, I think what we would like to get is actually direction on more specifics of what you would want to look at. So a focused update can mean lots of different things. Like I said, we added economic development as a topic. You may say, you know what, we actually don't want to deal with that, and so we would we could pull that out. You may say you want to add arts and culture to it. So I think again with something like that, we took our best guess, but ultimately what we would want to hear from you is what are in a focused update. What are the topics you feel and what are the elements you feel we should look at? And then I think the question of the difference between a focused and a comprehensive is, is it desirable for the city to have a single general plan under one cover where all of the elements sort of read the same and it's one document rather than in a series of documents?
Okay, well, I'm not getting into that area. The editorializing on which we want to go. We're not supposed to be doing that tonight. We're supposed to just be asking questions. And again, as far as the focused update, you say the focused update should be comprehensive update on housing, comprehensive on circulation, comprehensive on land use, environmental justice is required, and there'd be some updating on safety. That's it. We're not talking about adding all these different elements. So the staff report says the difference is $375,000 in cost. And you had told me you were going to take a look at that, and my presumption was the cost would be even a wider differential.
And I think the question also with that is whether the extent of the community engagement that would happen, because that is a large cost of that. Community engagement takes a very large portion of that. And so, again, that's where we could do less or we could do more, and we could have that conversation.
So it could be it's a minimum of $375,000, but it could be more if you stick to just the elements that you've laid out on your sheet here, without moving into all the other different optional and elements. It's at least a $375,000 difference, and it could be greater.
We think it's about $200,000, and it could be greater.
Okay. Well, the staff report says it's $375,000, and tonight you're telling me it's $200,000. That's $175,000 difference. So I need. Okay, you don't have to answer any further, but I need to get a little better clarification about what we're talking about cost-wise here. And finally, in your presentation, you showed a number of general plan updates you did for different cities, Hermosa, et cetera. How many have you done? 4, 5, 10?
In comprehensive or partial updates?
Yeah.
About 24.
A couple dozen, okay. This issue about going to a vote has come up. Did all those go to a vote?
It's very rare for general plans to go to a vote.
Very rare.
No, we haven't had any. But it's, that's a...
None.
That's
You've never brought a comprehensive general plan update to a vote of the people.
As I said, there have been very few that have gone that.
Have you done any?
That have done a vote of the people?
Yeah.
No, we have not.
And you've done 24 of these, and not one
Correct.
have gone to a vote of the people.
Correct.
Okay. See, I'm just asking questions. Right? Okay. Let me see if I got everything here with my questions. Okay. I think for now I'm good. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
If you think of any more, chime in. We'll come back to you.
What's that, Mayor?
If you think of any more questions, chime in. We'll come back to
I
you.
will.
Councilmember Engler.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question, I think, on the, you mentioned earlier that we are out of compliance with our housing element as it stands now. Is that correct?
No, we're not out of compliance. We are working from a certified housing element. We are in the middle of roughly a little bit beyond middle of an 8-year cycle. Remember that when we talk about RENA numbers, what that really means is that the state gives cities a total number of housing units that we need to provide the capacity for, and within that total capacity, there are different income categories that we have to meet also. We have met the moderate and above moderate. We've met about half of the low and very low. So that's still the unmet need that we're focusing on for the next few years before we have to submit the next element in 2021.
Okay, and you've done and I think a pretty good job of explaining the benefits of what we are proposing to do here is do with some sort of update. What's the downside of not doing some of the things that we were mentioning tonight, such as the comprehensives are focused, or if we just stay with the housing element only and the parts of other elements that would be part of that?
Well, we would, as Matt mentioned, we would update from sort of option one, we'll call it, the housing element and other related state laws that have triggers that either are temporal triggers that are specific points in time, specific dates, or, as was also mentioned, if we update two elements and that triggers the requirement for other topics to be addressed. We would do that in full compliance with state law. And going forward, as other elements were adopted, those would be adopted as well. The most important right now is the housing, but there are a whole raft of other laws that we will need to update in the near future. And as was mentioned, safety will be triggered. Environmental justice will be triggered even as part of just the housing element update. And I don't know if maybe Matt or Veronica would like to augment those comments.
Yeah, I would just say, you don't have to. You could just do the, that's why there's, three options. You could just do the housing and required elements. Someone in the future, there could be a challenge saying your general plan is out of compliance, but at that point you could then update your general plan. So, again, it's an option to just go forward with housing and the other required elements.
Although I would like to add, particularly on the safety element, because the law was written that upon the completion or update of the housing element, you must do these things for the safety element. As part of the housing element update, HCD will ask that question as to when are you going to update your safety element? Have you done it already? And if not, when you're going to do it. So it's kind of like a commitment in your housing element that you are going to do your safety element. So we're going to have to answer that question regardless in the housing element.
So what I'm hearing you say is if we strictly just do a housing element update, basically we have other elements that have to be rolled into that. So it's almost a focused approach to begin with.
Yeah, maybe we can actually go back to the slide on the housing option one, which is, and we called this the housing element and other required updates. And so this is, we'll call it the minimal approach. So, yes, you have to do your housing element. I mean, that's required. When you do your housing element, we believe you're going to have to do land use changes. It's possible you may not, but we think that's, given the number that were expected, that we think that would happen. We think you would have to do the disadvantaged communities. You would either have to, by January 1, 2022, you're going to have to update your safety element to address climate change and resilience. That, again, is a requirement. And then once you do those, you're going to be required to do environmental justice. The level of community engagement and the level of CEQA review, of environmental review, there, I think, is a little more flexibility in that approach. And so, again, we would recommend that there be some amount of community engagement given the conversations, and more than just the minimal. And we would recommend that you do an EIR. However, you could, the minimum requirement for housing element is 3 meetings. And then you might be able to do a neg deck or a mitigated neg deck for CEQA. It's possible, and if we went that route, it could be lower than the number we have in there. Again, that wouldn't be our recommendation of the best way to do it, but I think that would be kind of a conversation with the city manager and the city attorney if there's any challenges that they see with that.
I think we would better serve err on the side of more community involvement than less, given the interest that we have in land use and housing already. I would not recommend we go with less community involvement.
Well, as I mentioned, one of the biggest costs is community engagement. I also think, again, personally, one of the benefits of doing this is community engagement. But of course, if you're talking just the minimal and the legal requirements, it's 3 meetings for the housing element. You could do that, and legally, I think that's all you would have to do.
Good. Councilmember Adam, you can go next. Councilmember Jones after.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a real quick one. As far as paying for this, it seems to me that the bulk of it, no matter what way we go, is going to come from the general fund, taxpayer dollars. And I understand there could be some SB2 funding. That's a maybe. We're not quite sure as to how much we'd qualify for. But then there's also, in the staff report, you raised this issue about this long-range planning fee, which is basically you're tacking a fee onto every building permit that we would issue, so developers and builders and the like would then pay this extra fee to pay the general fund back. Correct?
That's correct.
So in essence, it would be a new tax, would it not?
It would be a fee. It's
fee, tax, kind of the same thing, right? Well, I know there's a definitional difference between a fee and a tax, but one way or another, it's money coming out of somebody's pocket going to government, and that would be a
tax.
Ironically, the money coming would be the very people that would be building the housing that we supposedly need. Correct?
It would be assessed on all building permits in this one scenario.
In one scenario.
And so I can provide more
just want
details
to
if you'd like.
clarify that. Thank you.
What's wrong? Is it my turn?
Yeah, Councilmember Jones, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate what Councilman Adam just said. It's really a built-in disincentive, isn't it, to get people to do what you want if they're going to have to pay an extra fee to do it. Let me say to the consultant, I really appreciate your compliments about the quality of our original general plan, which Mark refers to as the Green Book, I guess. Is that right? It's a different one than the movie is about that is currently out. Yes, you've got it. Yeah. Okay, good. It took about 3 years to do, or the research for it, I mean. I wanted to ask about the housing and related elements. What is related elements, and is that all? Is the price tag on that whole housing and needed related elements, still 0.8 million?
Should we go to the? Yeah. So the slide that we have up here, these are the topics, as you know, as I said, and we included in this and where a good amount of that cost comes from is the community engagement associated with it, as well as, again, we recommended doing an environmental impact report, which would include all of the traffic modeling and all of the related analysis. The city could decide later whether that is the right, from the CEQA side, whether an EIR is the right approach. And if that were the case, where if you did not want to do an EIR for whatever reason, the number would definitely be less.
Yeah, I notice in your chart here on page 6 that the housing element beginning in 1970 has been updated 7 times. Is that common to have to update the housing element? And the last time was in 2013?
The housing element update is set, the schedule is set by state law. It used to be required every 5 years or so. Now it's changed, it's every 8 years if you're able to do it on time.
To state law then?
Yeah, it's based on state law.
Let me ask the consultant, do you see any conflict between good overall planning for our city, you know, where residential goes commercial and industrial, so do you see any conflict between that and this continual demand by the state that we do more and more housing, or more and more affordable, or different? I don't know the different categories. Aren't there like affordable or semi-affordable? I don't know how the nomenclature.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't quite catch that.
You see any conflict between this continuing need to comply with state law relative to different types of housing and good planning? I mean, do you see that the housing could become overbearing after a while? I mean, I frankly, I like about our present level of population. I don't know if that makes me something, whatever it is, but you know, as I indicated, I was on the General Plan Committee, and we planned a range for the Conejo. We were planning for the whole Conejo Valley. We thought that these other areas like Lynn Ranch and Casa Conejo would see what a wonderful city we were, and they would be just jumping up and down to annex here, but they didn't. So we did plan for the entire valley, and that was about 140,000 to, I don't know what the top number was.
200.
Well, I think it was a little less than that, if my memory serves me. I thought it was 180, but, you know, I haven't looked at the figures lately. So, do you understand my question?
Yeah. You know, it's a really interesting question, and you know, I think it depends on the community, and I think ultimately, you know, how and that's the purpose for me of a general plan, which is to, and you did this in 1970, which is to sort of ask that question of how do you want to grow, where do you want to grow, and what do you want to look like, and you know, you know, some communities find it to be you know, a burden to and a conflict that the state is telling them what to do, and others don't seem to mind it. So, you know, I think that it's I think it ultimately is up to the community. So, you know, for us, it is, you know, it is as professional planners, it is something that we accept because that is what we are told to accept, and we can't change what the state is telling us to do.
Well, what do you see if we do the housing element with related elements that are part of that? What do you see as the final work product from that exercise?
Yeah, what we would see as the final work product is a new housing element, which would be done under.
I mean, what would the map look like? What do you think?
I don't know. I wish I could tell you, and that's part of the process. I don't know what the map would look like. And that's, to me, and to be honest, what I think it should look like doesn't matter as for what the community voices their opinion about what it should look like. And that's how we run the process, which is, and you probably did this in when you did the plan before, you have a community conversation, because I've looked in here, there's a whole community process.
Yeah, well, we had hearings all over town.
Yeah.
And then it took us a year on the council, still holding hearings.
Yep.
And our grant, we would have lost our grant had we not approved it in 1970. We approved it about, I think, between Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah.
So we took a lot of time, in that process.
Yeah.
But my original question is, do you see any conflict between this continuous need for housing of different types? It seems like it's ad infinitum, and what that effect would be on the quality of our general plan. You see any conflict there?
I guess the conflict I would see is not on the continual need for housing in the general plan. I would maybe rephrase it as, is there a conflict between adding more housing in the community and the quality of life in the community and what this community wants? And then I think it depends on, again, it's not my community, so I can't answer that question of whether I think there's too much, they're asking for too much housing here. You guys need to answer that question.
Well, would the work product include a map of different uses in our city?
Maybe as I just jump in really quick to help, because I think I see where Councilmember Jones is going with it. Mark, can you kind of just briefly explain again the regional housing needs assessment process that every city goes through every number of years, and the fact that a number is then allocated to every city, and then the housing element must show where those housing units are going to go?
Right. So every 8 years, the state, through the Southern California Association of Governments, provides a number to every city, including Thousand Oaks, in terms of dwelling unit capacity. So it tells Thousand Oaks, you have to provide capacity for X number of units. We don't have to build them, but we have to provide the zoning, general plan, development standards, et cetera, to create an environment that enables those units to be built. So when Thousand Oaks receives its RENA numbers, we look at our land inventory, we look at vacant land, we look at underutilized land, we look at projects that we are already involved in terms of having affordable partners on board to build them. And then we compare the two and figure out, do we have enough land capacity currently to accommodate the number that the state has given us? If we do not, then that puts us into a scenario of where we may need to change to increase the density of an existing residential property, or even change land use categories from, say, institutional to residential to accommodate that need. And we have to demonstrate that and actually make those changes prior to submitting our housing element.
So just a final comment, then we could see a situation in which the general plan, as a result of all this exercise we're going through, would differ somewhat maybe from the existing zoning on land?
The general plan certainly could be modified depending on the number of units that we receive from the state.
So then if somebody wanted to develop, you'd have to get a zone change to comply with the general plan. Is that it?
Well, we would modify the zoning concurrently with the general plan land use.
You would do that at the same
Yes.
time? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Murray.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Billy LaPena.
Thank you, Mayor McCoy. I have a couple of questions. One is the building fee that you are proposing. Would that be a percentage of the permit cost, or what or the other fees, water connection and so forth? What would that entail?
So this fee, and again, this is very conceptual. So we have an existing fee that is imposed on building permit valuation in the city, and it is used for technical upgrades that relate to our building and safety process, the technology that our inspectors use to ensure that buildings are safe, et cetera. That fee is 0.0% of the total building valuation. So it's 0.0003 of the total building valuation. Now, on an annual basis, building permit valuation ranges from about 100 million to 120, sometimes higher. And so that would be the basis multiplied times that factor, and that gives you an annual revenue. And in the case of the existing fee, I believe it's about $30,000 a year that we receive, and we apply that to technical upgrades. So it's that same principle. But in this case, it would be a long-range planning fee. It would be on that scale, it would be a very small portion of 1%.
Well, what I was concerned about is the cost of the person who is applying for permits, the builder, the applicant, whoever it may be. What would be the cost?
Correct. So it would be the same ratio. It would be, it could be points. It would be whatever, at whatever level you set it at. The current building fee that we have been employing for years is 0.03%. So it's a very small amount.
And I just want to add one point on top of that to Mr. Townsend's comment. Staff added that item regarding the potential of adding that fee because that is a commonly utilized practice by many cities to recoup costs associated with general plan updates. That being said, we have adequate funding within general fund reserves should the council elect to go that path as well. So it's simply an option on the table, and there are other ones that could be contemplated as well. But it was in an effort to give you full background. Looks like Mr. Town has another comment as well.
Mm-hmm. Just as a small example, using that rate on a $50,000 home upgrade remodel, it would be a $15 fee.
And that is a fee because it's only paid by one person. It's not a tax which would be applied to every taxpayer and resident in the city.
Yes.
So therein lies the difference. The other question I have is regarding the housing element, which of course is vitally important because we have to comply with it. Does it always include an update of our land use element?
That depends on the local communities. Some communities, they have done the general plan recently. They have adequately zoned vacant or plan for capacity for the future growth. Then you probably don't need to. But in your situation, because the land use element was done back in the 1970s and things have changed and a lot of development has already occurred, and also the way that the state is putting more stringent requirements on what qualify a site. So that makes it very difficult for communities like yours to guess at this time whether you have adequate capacity or not, and particularly the type of development that you may need in order to accommodate the lower income category of the regional housing needs allocation. Where would you want to place it? What would be the most appropriate location? You may have that kind of land use capacity in your general plan, in your land use element, but they may be located in neighborhoods or areas that you don't really want those type of housing to occur. So I think that a bigger conversation about accommodating the RHNA by what type of housing and where to have it occur is an important discussion, independent even of the housing element. But particularly because of the housing element, you want to make sure that you have that conversation because it's more real than before. It's not a theoretical kind of sites inventory. It requires sites to you look at it and say, does it really have real development potential? Have you removed all the constraints that would allow a development to occur should the market dictate it? So I think it really, while it is a theoretical capacity in the past, new state law makes it more real. And so because it's more real, you want to make sure that it's located in where you want it to locate.
Precisely, and I think that an update is vitally important because it will inoculate us to some extent against all of the different laws that are coming that will be affecting the cities. And they will look at general plan baselines, such as ours, that has a baseline of 80,000 units. And they see that, they're going to say, oh, you have more room for another 20, 30,000 units. So that is why it is vitally important that we look at our general plan and the land use element. More important than anything else at the moment.
My understanding from staff, too, that re-looking at the land use element could realign your overall capacity to a more realistic level. You still have enough capacity, but it's just where you want to put the capacity is the important decision.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Adam.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just a quick comment on that fee. Yeah, on a $50,000 house remodel, it might be nominal. On a project like 299 that we approved some months ago, a $60 million project, the fee would be many, many thousands of dollars. So let's not downplay the fee impact on a big project. Secondly,
oh, you said one thing. Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, you're right. I did, Mayor. Sorry. I beg your indulgence. Very quickly on regional housing needs assessment. You know, since I've been here, we're never required to build anything. We're just required to show where it could be built. It's really a planning and zoning requirement. Well, as I understand it, that may change. We'll have to see how when these RENA number comes out, where it changes from a planning and zoning requirement to an actual production mandate. Again, I don't know that for sure, but that has huge implications where we have to go beyond just planning for it. We have to somehow accommodate building for it. And again, the reason I bring that up is because that can also be proactively answered in the housing and land use element. Thank you.
That was the longest, quickest I've ever experienced it. Councilmember Bill de la Peña.
Just a quick counter statement.
Sure.
We are required to build affordable housing, and whichever units are not built, they are carried over into the next year. Currently, I think we are behind a few dozen units, so we are absolutely required to provide affordable housing.
We're required to build them, but we're way behind on what we're required to build. We've built maybe 10% of what we're supposedly required to build.
Mr. Town, I'm sure, can give us the
details. I don't know what the percentage is, but are we now way behind on what we're supposed to build?
But we actually have to build. It's not that we just show them where to build. We actually have to build.
If I may, if I could, yeah, if I can kind of correct that. It's a little convoluted. I hate to give the answer yes and no, but you're given a regional housing needs allocation. It's divided into income categories, very low, low, moderate, and above moderate income. You are obligated to remove constraints that are within your control so that you facilitate and encourage the development of housing. And one being that you provide for the land use capacity with adequate density and appropriate development standards. That's the requirement. Once you've done that, you've met that requirement, you don't have control over the market. If nobody comes and develop that, you don't have any obligation to build the units. You don't have any penalty. The only problem would be if you have provided the capacity and no development has been able to get through your process, then you're not meeting your low income category, then a developer could petition for a streamlined process to get the units built if they meet 17 different conditions. And those are not necessarily easy conditions to meet, but there are projects that are meeting those conditions. But no, you're not required to build the units. You're not carrying over the unbuilt units. You're carrying over the capacity that you're not providing. If you're required to provide for 100 units, but you don't have land zone that can allow 100 units to occur, then that shortfall would roll over to the next cycle. But if you haven't built it, it would not roll over to the next cycle.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, because I had discussion with staff, and it was in writing that units that were not built, and there is an exact number of units, will be carried over. That was a written staff report in our housing element staff report.
I think the unmet, I think, is meant for the unprovided capacity, not the unbuilt units. I think that's the meaning of that.
So the unbuilt units, we don't have to carry over?
No. At this point, I cannot
then
guarantee
I don't have
what's
to
going to
worry
happen
about the
with this state
110
law.
units or so that.
If I could chime in, unbuilt in this scenario means the city's approved a project for those units. It just hasn't been built. It doesn't mean no one's applied for it yet, and it hasn't gone through a process. So again, unbuilt means we've approved it. It just hasn't gotten built. Whereas the thing that does carry over is if no one has even applied for and claimed, if you will, those type of units.
Okay, that is what
Well,
I'm then.
in that situation, is a positive. If you have approved a project and it's not built, you can use that project. If the building permits or if the entitlement is still valid, you can use those units, those 110 or however many units, for the next cycle. You can apply it as a credit against your regional housing needs allocation.
Okay, then Mr. Town, where are we then currently with very low income housing units?
So currently we have an unmet need capacity versus unbuilt, but we have a capacity of approximately 60, very low, and it's about 60. You can find the exact numbers in a moment, but it's roughly 120 units that we, in our current housing element, in our current RENA cycle, we are striving to meet. So we have met our moderate goals, we've met our above moderate goals, we've met a number of our very low and a few lower income units. But this is a question of capacity that would carry over. And in this discussion, for instance, this is, and one can then appreciate the importance of projects like the Pinecrest project, because if you recall that your allocation of capacity to that project to go from institutional to residential had the stipulation that it had to include 80 affordable senior apartments. Those units would likely count toward those types of state requirements going forward. So that's the current situation.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Town. Councilmember Engler, and then we'll come to you, Councilmember Jones. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, thank you for answering all our questions. It's been a very enlightening discussion on our RENA requirements and how the housing element comes in. I want to refocus a little bit back in on the things that we've been asked to look at as far as where we go forward. Do we do just a land use and a housing element, or do we do just a focused or a comprehensive study and a general plan? It's been since 1970 that we've had a general plan totally done, and I agree with Councilmember Jones that it's been a great plan. It was well done, and it's been a guiding light for us over these years. In terms of both in dealing with state mandates and in terms of getting more community involvement, would we be better served going with the comprehensive approach so that we could have something that would better withstand challenges by the state? Or is it enough just to do the more targeted update?
Well, the more targeted update, the option one, we'll call it, is clearly what's required under state law. Housing element and these other elements, safety, environmental justice, those are triggered as a result of that action. going beyond that, it really, in my opinion, begins to evolve, tends to migrate into the broader questions of would the City Council like to address a broader range of issues? Would you like to address the questions of a refreshed vision of the community? Those are only questions that you can answer. It's really a question of scope. Clearly, we have to do number one. We really don't have any legal option there. Beyond that, it's really your prerogative in terms of what you would like this to look at, its scope, its breadth, its depth. And we're here to provide information, but ultimately it's City Council's representatives of the community that need to make that call.
Councilmember Jones, did you still have a question?
Yes. Getting back to the low cost or very affordable housing, what are the incentives for a developer to do that? Because as you know, when developers develop something, they figure out, what is a reasonable return on their money, and very affordable housing does not, do they get a subsidy for building the very low housing?
So the primary way that a developer receives benefit, quote unquote, from providing affordable units is through the density bonus program. And that is that if a developer provides a certain number of affordable units, and they are entitled at certain income levels, and they are entitled to essentially a corresponding number of density bonus units.
So I hear you saying an entire project would not be affordable. There'd be a few units in a larger project.
Correct. For instance, if you had a project of 30 units and you had 3 very low income units, the developer would receive 10 density bonus units. And then that essentially is the counterbalance to the very low income units that theoretically they're, obviously they're.
So it's a very, very slow process then, isn't it?
Yeah. Building affordable housing to meet the state's need for affordable housing is a very slow process. And there really are, and just to sort of add to what Mark said, there really are 2 main ways that affordable housing gets built. One is through this density bonus program, which provides incentives to private developers to build affordable housing at certain levels, and depending on what level of affordable housing you build, you get a certain density bonus. The other way is, you said, why would someone build what's the incentive to build affordable housing? Well, there are nonprofit developers who build affordable housing, and that is the other major source of affordable housing being built in the state, in that there are organizations whose mission it is to build affordable housing, and they get grants from the outside, they get tax incentives, and that's the other way that affordable housing really gets built.
Yeah, one last thing. Councilwoman De La Pena and I are on the COSCA board. Do you, Mark, ever foresee any pressure on us to turn over some of our open space for housing?
No.
No. And do you want to elaborate on that at all?
I think that open space, when we talk about community values, you know this very well, that preservation of open space was one of the values that has guided this community since it was founded in 1964. And so
I know it's a priority, but do you ever see any pressure if we're not doing enough in the way of housing from the state on saying, well, you've got all this open space?
I think it comes back to the concept that we talked about earlier, and that is areas of stability and areas of change. If Thousand Oaks wants to preserve open space, for instance, if that is off limits in terms of local values, then the question becomes, well, where? If we want to preserve our existing neighborhoods, then the question is, where would change occur? And then that begins to guide the discussion.
Okay, well, I hope it guides it in the right way.
Councilmember Bill De La Pena.
Thank you. Finally, I wanted to ask if the council were to choose a comprehensive update, could that be done minus the EIR and just with a neg deck, as Mr. Ramey mentioned?
And I actually want to introduce Greg, who's the CEQA consultant. And so if you want to come up to the microphone. Now, for all of those CEQA questions and EIR questions, maybe now is the time to ask them. He's really the expert on this. So can a general plan full update be done with just the neg deck?
Well, I have never known of one to be done. Theoretically, yes, and I think is much earlier in the discussion, it was asked, is there any state law saying you can't do a neg deck or even a mitigated negative declaration on a housing element or a general plan? And no, there isn't. But there is state law about CEQA, and CEQA is a state law, and it's statute, pretty extensive one, and there are also CEQA guidelines that have been put out there by the state. And basically for any project, including a general plan update of one element or all the elements or any combination thereof, if the project has the potential to have a significant impact, any significant effect on the environment, then really the burden of proof is on the lead agency, in your case, the city, to prove that there could not be any significant effect from the project. And that's basically what you're saying when you do a neg deck, is there's no potential for the significant effect to occur. You have to substantiate that in your initial study, basically. But then there's a legal standard, one legal standard that gets applied to initial studies, which is the burden of proof is on you to prove that. And if a challenger can basically make a reasonable argument that there might be a significant effect from the project on the environment, then you're required to do an EIR. So they could, if somebody wanted to, they could challenge the initial study and your conclusion, which is the negative declaration, and say, and if the court finds they have a reasonable argument, then the court could say, okay, city, you have to now do an EIR. If you do an EIR, the burden of proof is then on the challenger, and as long as you've proven that you've done a good and thorough analysis, you covered all your bases in the EIR, then and you've made a reasonable argument that your conclusions are correct, then the EIR stands. So that's maybe the most important determinant of whether you do an initial study or an EIR.
Thank you.
Or I mean, a negative deck. You're welcome.
Councilmember Adam.
Yeah, just quickly going back to this RENA business. I mean, I fully understand that RENA requires us to build certain tranches of housing, whether it's moderate income, market, and it also requires us to build affordable and low income. My point is that in the last RENA cycle, I think, I'm not sure the exact numbers, I think they wanted us to build 120 affordable and low income housing. And out of that, I think maybe 10 has been built. Something like that. It's a very small percentage. And the only point I was trying to make is that I don't know if the state's going to stand for that much longer. They may turn this from a zoning requirement into a production mandate. And that, again, could be addressed in the two elements that are, to me, the most important in this whole business, the housing and land use. And we could be proactive and provide for that versus having the state to tell us. But I do understand the requirements, we just haven't met them.
Councilmember Engler.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name.
Greg.
Greg?
Yeah.
In terms of the EIR and the CEQA requirements, and is there a minimal expectation or a standard in the industry that we need to meet there? I know it's not legally required, but I think I heard earlier that it's very rare, if not unheard of, that EIRs and those are not done in these general plan updates?
Well, it depends how extensive the general plan update is. I think Veronica mentioned that some cities who are doing a housing element, especially if they've just done some cities do a comprehensive general plan update, basically, but maybe their housing element isn't due. First they do that, then they may do a housing element, and but they're doing the general plan update with basically the housing element in mind. But in many ways, it is better to do them together. If you're just doing a housing element update, the rest of your general plan has gone through environmental review and it's been accepted. There's a challenge period, a legal limitation on a time limit on how long you have to challenge any form of environmental review. If that's passed, you do a housing element update and you already have enough land zoned to meet your RENA, and you really don't need to make any zoning or land use changes, then there are cases where cities do negative declarations. But usually when a general plan update is done and there's even some elements or a comprehensive update, I don't know of any cases where initial studies were done, or negative declarations, mitigated negative declarations were done on that kind of project.
Okay, if we were to not do an EIR, as been suggested that perhaps it's not needed for what we're doing, especially if a limited scope, is there any danger that in not doing one, we're going to jeopardize the result of what we have and have a plan that is now subject to legal challenges?
The closest thing to eternal life on this earth is a lawsuit with Vcla.
Agreed.
All right.
A negative declaration or mitigated negative declaration from an initial study, that is more subject to legal challenge. And if it's challenged, you have to at least redo, you may have to do an EIR on your general plan, and then really you can't adopt, the adoption of your general plan update is not final really until you certify whatever environmental document you're doing. In fact, there's a requirement, first you certify the environmental document or adopt it in the case of a negative declaration or mitigated negative declaration, and then you approve or deny the project. So it could basically hold up adoption of your general plan or whatever portion of your general plan you're adopting if your environmental review, your CEQA review, is challenged, and then you have to go back and redo it. So I think that's a hazard or a risk.
This is not a question, more of a comment. Given the state's potential mandates on several fronts, I think to develop as strong and as bulletproof a general plan as we can probably helps us in fending off some of those mandates.
Okay.
That's just a statement, no comment needed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Can I actually just maybe jump in just for a quick second here with this, which is, I think, as Greg said, if the comprehensive route is chosen, and I would say probably even the focused, because the focus is dealing with the two major elements of the general plan that deal with physical change, thus could lead to environmental impact, which is land use and circulation. So with those, I think it's highly advisable to do an EIR, a full EIR. With the housing element, of course you could decide not to, but with the housing element, with the option one, there's always the path now of going through the land use and the housing element and the other required elements, beginning that process, and then once there's a sense of the extent of physical change you think might happen, you can decide to do an EIR, a mitigated neg dec. In other words, the decision for option one, it doesn't on CEQA doesn't necessarily need to be made right now, right? You could start the process of land use and housing and safety, and then as that process goes forward, the decision could be made on, is it an EIR, is it a mitigated neg dec, or is it just a neg dec? And that could depend on the amount of change that you see happening and the physical change and the potential. Clearly, it's up to the city attorney and you all how best to proceed. But I think what I'm saying with that option one is, if you go the sort of the housing element approach, you don't have to decide now what the CEQA path is, and if so, therefore, cost could be a factor later.
I would actually echo that and say, more so than anything, it would be premature to determine what type of environmental analysis would be required, because we don't know what the project is, because we don't know what changes to the housing element in the land use map would be required. So it would actually be impossible for us to make that determination at this point.
Right. And again, our approach for the option one with the cost was under the assumption that there were going to be changes. But if there aren't, we actually don't need to go through the full EIR process.
Councilmember Billy LaPena.
Thank you. By perhaps choosing option one and not option three, comprehensive, are we kicking the can down the road?
State guidelines recommend that we update our general plan every 15 years. There's no hard and fast penalty for not updating it every 15 years. Many cities do, some don't. So I think it comes back to, again, what topics does City Council feel are appropriate at this point in the city's evolution for broad community discussion, because really what it comes down to is, what does the community want going forward? This is not a plan that staff or consultants are coming up with. This would be an update. It would be based on community input. That's the heart of it.
Exactly, and it's never been done before. So my question is, what is the deadline to apply for funding for a general plan update?
So there's funding for under SB2, which the city will get an amount, and I think, Peter, you said it was $250,000, and that comes to the city to do a whole range of things, which could include a general plan. Could be other things as well. So the city, so long as you apply, you will get that money. You apply and you use it for something that the money is for. And again, it is not just a general plan update. So, that's, it's not like there's a clock ticking and you have to apply just to do that. And I just, I want to go back to your previous question about, kicking the can down the road. I mean, I think the reason to do a comprehensive update compared to just the limited amount is really to have, as Mark said, to have that community conversation about growth in the city and about the future of the city. It sounds like from the 1970 plan, it was a worthwhile exercise to go through that, and it hasn't happened in the city in a while. If you're not comfortable moving forward with that process now, I think you're probably just going to keep getting letters from the state saying that your general plan is out of date. But there's nothing really punitive from the state. The punitive really comes from
at least not
side.
Yet.
But I think the punitive is going to come from the housing side, not is your noise element up to date or not, right? So really, the benefit is the community conversation around it, and to have that visioning process. It's to have a general plan that is under one cover that people feel is usable. It's about having clarity to the community on the vision of the city. If people want that in one document, you might not need to do it in a general plan. There's other ways that you could do this. It's about having being able to incorporate and to talk about the interconnectedness of all of these topics that are related to the general plan and putting them under one cover, and having a document that is valuable and usable to the city. If you all feel that what you have now is adequate for what you want, there's no one outside telling you that you're going to need to do that. There just are the minimum requirements that we talked about in option one.
Okay, and you know what? I was just going to ask you another question, but it slipped my mind, so that's it for now then. Thank you.
Councilmember Adam.
Yeah, I'm a little confused about something. The gentleman that came to the podium, that's okay, you can stay there, because I want to ask Matt. If I heard him correctly, I thought he said that if the housing element had been updated recently, which ours has, 2013, and that if, our scope was going to be limited, maybe, say, the focused update, an M&D would suffice. And that, it could be challenged, and there's a 60-day challenge period, but if it wasn't challenged, then we'd be good. But you're not saying that. So I thought he was the...
No, I said that when we...
I mean, granted, maybe an EIR might be the best of all worlds, but I'm just trying to get it.
Yeah. Again, I think going back to what the city attorney said, which is that when we did this, we expected there would be land use changes because of the expected number. Again, this was an assumption. We don't know what the RENA numbers are going to be, but we expect that there will be a much larger number than you had before, which will trigger potential changes to the land use element, which could trigger that there's a potential for environmental impact. So therefore, that's why we said that potentially the best course is an EIR. But the reality is, we gave the conservative, if the decision about CEQA for option one, if you're just doing housing and the other elements, that decision on CEQA could probably come later. I think one of the other questions you want to ask yourselves with this is how much engagement do you want to do with that? Because if you're talking about cost, again, that's an important piece of that. I generally would prefer overall. I mean, I think that there's a lot of time and effort that goes into CEQA, if you can minimize the amount of environmental review that you do and you're still protected legally, then that makes sense to do. So if the consensus is that no EIR is needed, then don't do an EIR. We did it sort of in the conservative way because there's not an EIR.
Okay. All right. Again, I'm not saying the EIR might be the way to go or not to go. This is a question and answer period, trying to find out what we would be required to do. And it sounds to me like the gentleman said that as long as we update recently,
you would not be required to do an EIR.
That's okay. That's what I'm getting at.
Yep.
Now, whether or not we should or not is a different issue altogether. We'll discuss that later.
Correct.
But it sounds to me that a mitigated netting of debt under the focused update, considering we just updated our housing in 2013, would suffice. And now, is that preferable? I don't know. We'll talk about that later. But it would suffice because this, an EIR is a long, complicated, expensive process. It generates a document that can be about a foot thick, and it's subject to challenge.
If I could comment, the speaker stated if we had recently updated our general plan, then doing a housing element built off that recently updated general plan could be done without an EIR, and that happens occasionally. Not that we recently did a housing element and thus a general plan amendment could be done with an ND.
I thought he simply said if we had updated our housing element recently, which we have, 2013. All right. We don't have to debate it at this stage. Just trying to get the facts. Thank you.
Well, good. Thank you. I think we've exhausted questions. No, I'm moving on.
No, just one more. The $250,000 grant, is that already incorporated in your cost estimates, or is that something that has not been considered yet?
The numbers there are actually just the cost to do it, and the source of funding is another question.
There's no guarantee on that, by the way. No. The implication was that's locked in, $250K. That's not the way I understand it.
Good. Well, to my fellow colleagues, we have to do our homework on this one, and just remember, and I think the part that kind of hit me is with the HCD, that it doesn't, in a sense, recognize local growth measures like Measure E. And as we look at these three categories or these three options, and the citizens of our community have clearly stated they want limited growth through Measure E. We have to protect that from the encroachment at the state level and still work within their guidelines. So this comprehensive, we need to take a look at it. So as we get together next week, let's be prepared for that. Is that it for questions? 2 weeks, I'm sorry. Next meeting, I meant. Is that it for questions? Okay. So there's nothing on item 12, item 13, so let's just take it to you, City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor McCoy. Our next meeting will actually be on the 12th of February. And on that agenda, in addition to this item, which will be back before the council for specific direction, we will have an update from Thousand Oaks Alliance for the Arts on some of their programming. We will have our landscape master plan construction contract. These are for the demonstration sites that the council considered through our landscape master plan process, so it's very exciting. And we'll also have an urgency ordinance relating to small cell facilities, and a report out from the new mayor and council member academy that the league is putting on, that Councilmember Engler and I and Legislative Affairs Manager Mina Leba will be attending later this month. That is it.
Thank you. Ms. Noonan, you want to share about the closed session?
Yes, thank you. We have two closed sessions tonight. The first one is existing litigation. The Public Utilities Commission application by Cal American Water for authorization to increase its revenue service by $34,559,200 pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9A. And the second matter is conference with legal counsel on potential initiation of litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D4. It is unlikely I'll have anything to report.
Thank you, Ms. Noonan. We adjourn. Our next regular meeting will be February 12th, and that ends tonight's meeting.